also to begin with at the beginning, but I'd reckon from your point of view, you wouldn't mention that this is a language composed of letters, characters in that sense. That this is a language of symbols, wouldn't you say? It's a symbolic language.
Yes,
That is the first.
it's a symbolic language, but there's also symbolism associated with phonetic sounds.
Ah.
And so in many cases, you can predict what the meaning of a word will be if it's old enough based on its phonetic value.
That's really interesting. So language obviously is a big part in the clue here as well, because the words that we give to things today, do you think that they still have a root then in some of these ancient languages and the way that they pronounce them as well? Because in most cases we end up with a language which has been run through the Greek system, or it's been even Latinized or things like this, right?
Well, yes, but many of the words still hold up remarkably well. I mean, studying Egyptian hieroglyphic language, I come to a much better of an understanding of where many ancient Hebrew words came from, but very often I'll come across roots that make sense in terms of modern languages also.
I've heard suggested that there is a relationship, obviously, between the Hebrew letters and Egyptian hieroglyphics, that the Egyptians also had a writing language in terms of more mundane detailing of things, and I've heard that it's been suggested that Hebrew was this language. Have you been able to find any evidence for something like that, Laird?
Yes. Let me try to put this into a coherent form. It looks to me that the cosmology existed before writing. There's evidence among the pre-dynastic tribes that they worshipped many of the same gods and goddesses, and that they knew about many of the same ritual shapes. Now, in the cosmology, as the cosmology plays out in Buddhism and in the Dogon culture, as you build a stupa or as you build a Dogon granary, you are evoking a series of geometric shapes, and each shape is associated with certain concepts. And the shapes and the concepts match between Buddhism and Dogonism.
Mm.
Now you go to Egyptian hieroglyphic language, and you see that some of these same shapes play out as characters in the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, carrying the same meaning, the same traditional meaning, as is known in Buddhism and among the Dogon. And my conclusion from that, my tentative conclusion from that, is that these pre-existing shapes that were associated with concepts were adopted as written characters.
Ah, I see.
That idea is supported in China and Tibet by a little tribe called the Na-Ki, who have they preserve the world's last surviving hieroglyphic language, and it's known for certain that the language was originally developed to express concepts of cosmology, and they use many of the same symbols. And based on my knowledge of Egyptian hieroglyphs, I'm able to predict what those certain symbols are going to mean in the Chinese language, and which words are going to appear in.
It's a kind of a universal Rosetta Stone that you have discovered here in one sense, then, right?
Yes, but it's the comparisons that where the value are, and the comparisons depend on a recognition of the fact that these different systems fundamentally match. They came from something that was the same. Now, from the standpoint of many researchers, the reason we have pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in South America is because of something, a tendency of societies when they reach a certain stage and have the same materials to work with, that they develop similar forms.
Mm.
They're saying there's no system here. It's just natural that if you have stone to work with, you're going to create stone blocks, and eventually you're going to stack them up in the form of a pyramid. And my answer to that is, that's true. However, in Egypt and in South America, you have very complicated symbolism associated with a pile of stones that matches.
Yeah.
For example, the four faces of the pyramids relate to the same four constellations, and those constellations were used to control the agricultural cycle. Now, there's nothing about stacking stones that would compel that to happen. And so it's a symbolism that demonstrates for us that there must have been a common system here. Otherwise, it's not credible that both cultures would have come up with the same symbolism for the same form.
Some of the architecture, if we look at that, of the Dogon people is It's very interesting, and it's in its own way unique. It has obviously again its similarities there, but for instance, we can even look at the Dogon granary that you mentioned a couple of times now in that sense, and that to me looks like similarities even to Egyptian obelisk. Actually, what can you say about that, Laird?
Yes, that's true. The symbolism is very complicated because it has many different facets and levels, and whoever put the cosmological plan or the civilizing plan together provided us with certain reference points to guide ourselves by, so that we know when we see a given shape or a given symbol which aspect of the cosmology is being spoken about.
Mm.
Now, for example, you're familiar with the progression water, fire, wind, and earth.
Sure, the elements, yeah.
Now, within the cosmology, there are many different four-stage progressions here, and there's a reason for there being four-stage progressions, but many different four-stage progressions that are presented in different ways to give us a point of reference as to where we are in a creative process. For one of these, for the Dogon, is a series of animal forms, going again from insects to fish to four-legged animals to birds. Now, based on that progression, we can predict that in Egypt, the god or goddess who's associated with the very first stage of creation, the god who is associated with non-existence coming into existence, will be an insect. Mm. And in Egypt, it's Keper, the dung beetle. Mm. We also know that we can predict that the god or goddess who's associated with the final stage of creation, which is expressed in terms of the formation of a word, in Egypt, that's the god Thoth, who happens to be bird-headed. And so, by seeing the head of the animal on the Egyptian god, we can ask ourselves, what type of animal is this, and place his or her mythological role or role in creation at the proper spot along the continuum of these four steps.
I see.
Now, they've done this over and over again, and they said one involves four stages of development of a goose from an egg, and another one involves four stages of the growth of a plant. And so as you go along, and you see a given reference or a textual statement, and they mention one of these key references, not only do you know which theme of the cosmology are they talking about, because each of these four-stage progressions relates to a theme, but you also know where in that theme you are. Mm. So if you come to Anubis, who is a dog, or is there's a jackal character, the jackal who is the symbol of disorder, you know, based on our animal progressions, that's got to be the third stage, the four-legged animal stage, of the creative process.
That's interesting. So we can see correlations here again between the Egyptian system and things like that. And I know that Robert Bouval right now is writing about the people of Nabta Playa as one thing, and then we have the Dogon up in northwest of Africa. Do you think that they could be in some way have been responsible in terms of the Egyptian high culture in that sense, but and then eventually retreated back to their own region, so to speak, or have they do you think that they've kept to themselves pretty much in the area where they're at right now?
It is possible that the Dogon are related to Nabta Playa. The Dogon say that their cultural memory is that they came from a very large lake